our bread has had enough time to cool now. Let's take a look at this and see what one of these looks like. There we go. Look at that. Isn't that absolutely lovely? So there you have it. White bread. I hope you enjoy this recipe. It's absolutely fabulous. I think you should try it. Well, today we are going to be making white bread. Now, white bread is a really simple thing to make, and it is sort of the foundation of where you need to start if you're going to be baking breads. And once you understand this, then making other kinds of breads becomes a little easier to understand. Now, our ingredients list, let's go over this first. Back here we have 3 cups of flour. Now, on my flour, you can get any kind of flour you want, but I like to use a high-protein bread flour, something that is high quality. So if you go out looking for good quality bread flours, the word bread flour being on the package makes a big difference, and it does improve the quality and texture of your bread. I have here some water, and I'm going to add to that water this dried milk. Now, I like to use dried milk when I'm baking. It seems to work really well, and it adds a wonderful flavor to it. Back here I have yeast. This is 2½ teaspoons of fast-acting yeast, or fast rise yeast. Now, 2½ teaspoons is equivalent to 1 package. So if you ever see a recipe that calls for using a package of yeast, 1 package or whatever, you know that it's 2½ teaspoons that's in that package. Here I have 2 tablespoons of butter that's been melted. I have 1 teaspoon of salt, and I have 2½ teaspoons of sugar. Now, what do we do to combine these? Well, let's start with the milk. And I'm just going to add it to the water I have. Now, this water that I have is hot. I'm using hot tap water, and it's a little bit warmer than I initially need. However, I knew that adding the milk to it and then pouring it into this cool stainless bowl right over here is going to cool some of that down. Now, I want to mix that up first, and I'm just a little bit short on quantity. So what I want to do is to add just a little more hot water to bring that up. There we go. I have 1 cup of milk that's hot. Now, it looks like some of the solids in that dried milk aren't being agreeable, and that's mostly because I mixed it with hot water. A lot of times when you're mixing dried milk, it doesn't like to mix up easily with hot water. And if there are little clumps like that, don't worry, because that's going to be broken down when you do the mixing. Now, I want to start by placing my milk, my warm milk, right here into this mixing bowl. Now, the optimum temperature for that, if you want to get a thermometer and put it on it, the optimum temperature is going to be 105 degrees, 105 to 110. Yeast can usually handle temperatures up to 115 safely, so don't worry about any problems there. Now, the first thing I want to do is to prepare this milk for the yeast. Yeast needs sugar, so to get it to go active, I'm going to put the sugar in first. I'm going to stir it in. I'm going to stir this well because I want that sugar to all be dissolved. Just like if you like sugar in your iced tea, some of it doesn't like to dissolve at first. There we go. Now I'm going to add the yeast. I'm going to mix that in. And then I'm just going to wait for a few moments. And what I want to do here, this is something that used to be done a lot and isn't taught much anymore. It's called proofing your yeast. To proof your yeast, you mix it with your milk and the sugar, and if it starts foaming up on you, then you know it's good and active. If it does not foam up on you, then you know you have some bad yeast, and there's no sense in wasting the rest of the ingredients. Get another batch of yeast and then check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this just a few moments, and I'm already starting to see some light activity in this bowl. See if I can get this so you can see it. And we're going to watch this together. Now, if you'll notice very carefully, you're going to see some of the yeast rise up from the bottom. It'll burp a little bit here and there. And we're going to give that just a moment more. Okay. Now, this is not a necessary step. If you have some fresh yeast and you know it's fresh and it's still in date, and that's the nice thing about them dating the packages of yeast, then you know it's going to be alright. Sometimes folks like to use their own home yeast, a yeast that you've acquired, let's say, off of some of your vegetables or something like that. And that is a really neat thing to do, and we'll get into that in advanced bread making. Now you see how it's getting fluffy on the edges? We have a colony separate from our milk, and it's foaming up a bit. That means we have a good active yeast there. I want to go ahead and use this yeast. Now, first thing I want to do, I want to get my butter in this. So I'm going to pour the butter down in there. Let's start with our flour. Now, on a lot of recipes, it calls for you putting in a portion of the flour and saving some back, just like so. You don't always have to do this, especially on a single loaf like this. Start this out on a low speed, and whenever you're using a dough hook and kneading dough, use that on a low speed. Don't use it on a high speed. A, it doesn't make for good dough, and B, it's really hard on the mixer. I'm going to come a little closer here. Get a good look. Mixing up real nice. I'm going to shut this off for just a moment. When you're adding the rest of your flour, don't pour it in while the mixer is running, or you may get a face full of flour. Okay? Turn it on the lowest setting first. That way it doesn't go pitching flour up out of the bowl and all over your kitchen. I'll turn it up just a little. Now what we're going to do is allow this to knead, and as it's kneading, it's going to form that dough up into a ball. And when that happens, get some salt down in there as it's working. Now, why did I add that salt late? Well, salt is put in dough to inhibit the growth of the yeast. And I don't want my yeast coming in contact with it any sooner than absolutely necessary. I want it to get a good kickstart. So I put that little bit of salt in right as the dough is about halfway formed up into a ball. rising the dough, the bowl that you're going to be rising it in needs to have something to keep the dough from sticking on the bottom. So I'm just going to take some butter. We're going to rub it right in the bottom here. And it doesn't have to be really good, just enough in there to get pushed around. Now, set that butter aside. Once you have it a little bit buttered like so, finish rubbing that around. And we don't have to worry about our dough sticking in the bottom of that bowl once it's rising. Doing that with a glove is nice. Now I'm looking in this and I'm noticing my dough is extremely dry looking. Let's take a close look at this. Looks like I've got a real sticky mass that's risen up on this hook. Let's pull that off. Get it right down in there. Turn it underneath. Turn some of your ingredients. And then restart this. Never ever reach down inside of one of these when they're running. They have a real bad tendency to break people's bones. There we go, we're getting a little better mixing action now. I have a few bits on the bottom that are resisting, so I'm going to add just a couple more tablespoons of water, about 1 tablespoon at a time. And that's pulled most of it up off of the bottom now. It's starting to form into a good ball. Look at this ball. Now, it's a little sticky. That's just fine. It's starting to form up real good. This is just what we're wanting. Now, I'm going to let this knead for a few more minutes. Allow this to knead for about another 2 minutes in order to shape it up into a nice ball. Alright, it looks like it has kneaded enough now. Now, one of the ways you can know if your dough is too moist, it's going to want to rise up above this collar right here. Now, you may have a different kind of mixer that doesn't work in quite the same way, but generally if your dough's riding up on your hook, then it lets you know that you've got too much moisture in there. Now, pull that out. Looky here. If you wish to hand knead this on a board and form it into a nice smooth ball, you can do that. But at this point, it's not quite necessary. Now what I'm doing here is a form of kneading. It's just called rolling the dough, and I'm rolling it backwards and tucking it in, just like so. In, and I keep doing that, and then I'll pinch it a little bit. There we go, on the bottom, to close it off. Now I'm going to place this in our bowl. Remember that bowl that we just greased up? Let's put it right inside of this, and we're going to put it on top of a warm location. I have here an older style stove, and it has pilot lights over the burners, and this right here is now nice and warm. It feels like it's about, maybe 105 degrees or 110, so it's not hot enough to burn me, but it feels nice and warm, and it's a perfect spot for your yeast or to be active and to rise up. Now what I want to do to keep this from getting dried out on top, I want to either cover this with a plastic wrap or with a moist towel. That works. That's sort of an old-fashioned method of doing it. The way I like to do it is just take a bigger bowl, turn it right upside down, and now it has a lid. Okay? All I have to do is wait for that to rise, and that's going to take, I'm going to check this in about 15 to 20 minutes, and you and I will both take a look at exactly what it looks like at that time. So remember, what we have now is this. Let's see what we're going to have in just a little while. Let's take a look at our dough now. It has now been 15 minutes into rising. There we have it. See how much larger that's getting? Okay, I'm going to give it just a little more time. 15 minutes in with a fast rise yeast, we should only have to rise this for about 30 minutes. Now it has been just a little more than 35 minutes, about 35 minutes and a few seconds. Our dough has a little more than doubled in bulk, and that is exactly what we're looking for. I'm going to take this over to the breadboard, and let's punch it down and roll it out so that we can rise it a second time. Now, to roll our dough out, first we need to punch it down. Literally, just take your fist and let it have it. Okay. I'm going to kind of shake this just a little bit. Now we're going to be rolling this, and this is a little sticky. Always have a little bit of extra flour handy, otherwise your rolling pin is going to stick really bad to your dough, or your dough will stick to the board that you're rolling it on. I'm going to get another pinch of flour on this, rub it over it. I need a little flour on this side. There we go. It's coming along really nice. Pressing down good and firm with my rolling pin. Now always keep a towel handy so that you can pull back any excess flour that you may have. There we go. Now, what I want to do, I'm trying to make this narrow and long because I'm about to roll it. There we go. Now, the reason I'm shaping it this way So let me show you the pan that I'm going to be putting this in. This is the pan. So you can see I want it to be about the size of the bottom of the pan and definitely the size of the top of the pan. So this is slightly wider on top. It's slightly narrower on bottom in the pan than it is on the dough. So it's going to work fine. Now what we need to do, start your dough by rolling a little bit and just kind of pinching it in. Okay? And we'll take this and roll it. And as I do, I'm going to pinch and knead those ends together. Again, working the ends down. And I'm just squeezing and pinching them together. And tuck it in. What's going to happen as this rises the second time, it's going to form into a nice loaf because we're going to rise it in that pan. Now if you remember earlier, I took some butter and I greased up a bowl so that it would not stick, and sure enough, when we pulled it out nice and clean. It's exactly the same thing we want to do on our pans. Now let me find a glove here. I like to keep these little cooking gloves handy. They make doing work like this a lot easier. I'll take my butter, put it down that pan, just rub it around real good. You want to rub it on all four sides as well as the bottom. Go. Now once I get that done, the whole pan is not well buttered. What I need to do is to take my gloved hand and rub the butter around so that it does coat all the edges and the corners, those bottom corners where the sides meet the bottom. Make sure you get that good. That way everything is well coated. Now this has two purposes. You might say, well, I don't like to use butter in my diet. Well, what this butter is doing, and this is important, it is A, it's flavoring the crust, B, it is coloring the crust, and C, the way it fries the crust, it adds a little bit of crunch to it, just makes it a little crispier on that edge. So it's doing three things that make the white bread a lot better in the long run. Go ahead, use the butter, it's not that much. Now, let's take our loaf, let's put it right down in here. Now, I'm going to go back over to the stove and take a large bowl and put it over this. The old bowl that we had won't fit, so let's use a larger one. There we go. Let's let that rise. Let's see how that white bread loaf is coming out. Well, it looks like it is almost ready. It has been about 35 minutes now. It's looking really nice. But I want to give it just a little more time to finish puffing and filling the pan on these corners. Just a bit more time. So I'm going to cover it again, and we're going to wait just a few more minutes. Let this finish rising. So let's check it again here in a few minutes, and we'll know at that time. Once you have your dough under a cover, you want to go ahead and turn your oven on for the temperature you're going to be cooking at. If you're going to be cooking two different loaves, then you might want to consider cooking the first loaf at the lower temperature and then warming the oven up for the second loaf. Otherwise, you might end up burning the outside of the second loaf. Well, there you have it. Now on this white loaf, we're going to want to have about 400 degrees. Let's take a look at our loaf now. It has been about almost 50 minutes. Now that has finished filling up the pan really nice. I'm going to go ahead and place this in the oven. It's going to be put in there at 400 degrees, and I'm going to give it about 25 to 30 minutes. It should be a golden brown on top, and when you thump it, it should sound just a little bit hollow. Now, if you wanted this to have a glossy coat on it, you can do that. Just put an egg white in a bowl with about 2 tablespoons of water and mix that together, beat it together well, and then brush it over the top of this, and when you bake it up, it'll give you a nice glossy coating on top of that bread. Okay, I'm just going to leave it mine plain Jane. I have just now removed the bread from the oven. I do not want it to set long in this pan, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pan and hold it with one towel while turning the bread out onto another and lay it onto a cooling sheet. There we go. That is 1 loaf of white bread ready to go. Our bread has had enough time to cool now. Let's take a look at this and see what one of these looks like. There we go. Look at that. Isn't that absolutely lovely? So there you have it. White bread. I hope you enjoy this recipe. It's absolutely fabulous. I think you should try it. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today, the show where you can get great recipes and the best techniques are taught. Please subscribe to Texas Cooking Today, where you will always find something hot and ready to eat.